Hello, my name is Thomas, and welcome to the podcast British Culture, Albion Never Dies. This is part 2 of a deep dive into tea. I travelled last week about 5 hours by high-speed train from just north of Hong Kong to Fuzhou in Fujian province, which is a province in China famous for its tea culture. I met an old friend called Caine, who is an expert both on British culture and Fujianese tea culture. In this episode, we talk about the quality of tea in teabags as opposed to loose tea. Caine asked me about Turkish tea culture, and we also talk about what different people have with tea. We don't shy away from the big debate. Are Jaffa Cakes cakes or biscuits? We also touch on tea culture in Hong Kong, Taipei, and Malaysia. You can find Caine's series on Fujianese tea on YouTube, and you can find me on Instagram at Fleming Never Dies. That's the place to go to if you have an answer for our question that pops up throughout the episode. What are biscuits in the USA exactly? Respectfully, this baffled us both throughout our discussion. Listen and enjoy. So we've just now got a new cup of tea.
Yeah, we just made a second cup, and I did a much better job on this. As I was saying, I made the last one too bitter. See, the thing is, besides the fact that I'm not a massive drinker of traditional Chinese tea, and as a result I don't make it a lot, there's also a very different way of making tea in the UK to how you make it in China. So in the UK, what you generally do, as I'm sure most of your listeners will know, is you stick a tea bag or possibly some loose tea in a teapot or in a cup, and then you steep it for a good 3 minutes, maybe even longer. Like my dad likes his tea very strong, so he'd steep it for a very long time. The thing with tea in China is it's generally a lot higher quality. The tea that we get in tea bags in the UK, it's mass produced, and it's the producers know how people are going to make it, so they're not going to. They would rather produce a lot of quantity, which isn't quite so strong, than sort of more concentrated. Concentrated is the wrong word perhaps, but more strong, higher quality tea. Whereas in China it's the opposite. So in China, when making tea generally. And again, this really depends on the province, right? Because there's different tea cultures. But let's just talk about where we are in Fuzhou. In Fuzhou and Fujian generally, you'd put quite a lot of tea, depending on the size of your teapot, which usually, again, in Fujian, it's actually a very small teapot, only enough to make sort of one small cup of tea. You put the tea, you almost fill the teapot with the tea, and then you pour on the water, and then you let it steep for a very short amount of time, maybe 15-20 seconds, and then you pour it out, but then you add more water and you continue this process. So each tea bit that you get has only been steeped for maybe 20 seconds, but you can steep the tea itself many times because it's very good quality and it's very strong. So the mistake I made the first time I made this was I steeped it far too long, whereas the one that I've just made I've steeped for much less time.
Oh, this does taste good.
It's better, right? So, what's the process of making tea in Turkey? Because I know they've got a tea culture in Turkey, and I know this is going to sound really silly because I'm probably conflating different things, but I know there's the tea culture that you get in parts of North Africa where they make the tea by using a lot of sugar and things like that. Is the tea culture in Turkey similar? I know it's obviously not the same part of the world, but I think of the history of sort of Ottoman Empire.
Exactly, so the Ottoman Empire means that a lot of these Turkish things have spread throughout, often with regional variations, like look at the traditional headgear of a lot of North Africa and its variants on the fez.
Right, okay,
It was a relatively late thing for the Ottoman Empire. It was really the reforms, the Tanzimat reforms in the 19th century, as they were trying to get more Western. But the tea, the very, very sweet tea in small glass kind of cups.
Yeah.
That is the tradition, and of course it comes along on what is basically a tray suspended with a group of wires.
Okay.
So just as in China, we'll often get a Daobao coffee or kind of this little bag. The cup comes in a bag. So it does the same job. So you can walk along with it very happily because it will often be with a group and they'll just dole it out.
So it comes in like a metal takeaway bag?
Like a metal tray with 3 wires going up to the middle. So they basically hold on to the top of the 3 wires.
Okay.
So as it goes along, you don't spill any.
Right, I see. And that's something that they would do that in like a restaurant or a cafe, or on the side of the road?
In a restaurant or a cafe.
Okay, I see.
Cafes are by the side of the road, so...
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, but as I say, it's not so common in Turkish Cyprus. I've often had it, say, if I go to Istanbul, and you'll have it from a little kushe, a little kiosk.
Okay.
And so I'll often get a cheap, just a small cup of sweet.
It's very sweet, right?
Very, very sweet, yeah. And of course, in the east of Turkey, you've got Kurdish tea. The Kurds are a minority group found in Turkey, Iran, Iraq. So I knew an Iraqi Kurd who was in the UK, and for a long time he was complaining he could never find the right kind of tea.
Right.
But one day, I don't know, I was feeling more Turkish than usual. I had some kind of tea, and he just smelled it and was like, "Where did you get Turkish tea?" And it was Earl Grey tea with some sugar in it.
Oh, really? Okay, there's
exactly the same. Again, Earl Grey has that.
Earl Grey is it's flavoured with is it lemon rinds? Something like that, right?
I don't know what goes into it, but it is some kind of citrus flavour. If you want some traditional Middle Eastern tea,
just get some Earl Grey and sugar. In fact, we could probably touch on Earl Grey, because I know that again outside of the UK, when many people think of traditional British tea, they think of Earl Grey. I think that's mostly down to the incredible marketing done by Twinings, because
and also the product placement into a Bond film recently.
Because actually, again, in the UK, for most Britons, Earl Grey isn't that popular. As we spoke about before, it's really just plain black tea. That's the real thing. Certainly, let's say my family, who are just a very, I'd say, normal British family, none of them drink Earl Grey. You wouldn't find Earl Grey in any of my parents' cupboards or anything. So in fact, the most popular brands of tea are, like you said, Tetley's, Yorkshire tea, and they're all just plain black tea. So Earl Grey is one of those things that is very popular outside of the UK, and I think many people believe it to be very British. And it's not to say that it isn't, or that there aren't British people that drink it, but within the UK it's very much a minority drink.
I'd say it's quite a colonial British drink as well. So there's a certain set in the UK perhaps where this would be more common, a bit like a gin and tonic. Feels like a very...
Maybe, yeah. But again, I wonder if that's life imitating art. You know what I mean? Because a lot of that, like I said, it is product placement in like Bond films and stuff like this. I wonder if that's because of advertising, because of popular culture, people have been led to believe that it was the more a popular tea in the colonies. But I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't know if there's actually any historical evidence to back up that idea, and whether or not Earl Grey would have actually been more popular than...
history of popular imagination, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The Victorians were not drinking the Tetleys that we know today.
Exactly, yeah. It's so I don't know, but I know that in the modern UK, it's not that popular compared to just standard black tea. Is there any reason you think why the Turkish have that such incredibly sweet tea?
General taste for very sweet things, and of course with the coffee it's incredibly bitter as we would drink it. You'd have it with lokum, Turkish delight, which is incredibly sweet, and you'd also have it with a glass of water.
Right.
So you have those set of three vital items. In some places they've offered me nuts instead. So Turkey is where a lot of the world's nuts are grown. And apricots. So just like Fujian here is where so much of jasmine comes from, there's one place, Malaysia in Turkey, where a huge proportion of the world's apricots come from. So much so that in the city, quite a sizable city, just from the mountains all around, when the apricot trees are in bloom, you can smell apricot everywhere in the city.
That's awesome.
So I'm top. It is on my bucket list.
Okay, you haven't got it in there.
It's quite an out of the
So
way.
you would get fresh apricots or like dried apricots?
They'll be dried.
Okay,
and then of course, because Turkey is so great for growing any kind of food, and most of the Middle East is not, it exports to all surrounding regions everywhere. Turkish dates or Turkish apricots is popular.
Okay, that's great. So I just remembered something. It's not really related, but I remember reading about Alexander the Great's conquest into that part of the world, and obviously at that time the only way to sweeten your food was with honey, right? Where Alexander the Great, obviously in Europe, we didn't grow sugar canes, and when he first encountered sugar canes, I've always loved the way he described it. He said, "It's a plant that makes honey without bees." And I always thought that was an incredibly beautiful way to describe what sugar cane is, you know.
Alexander the Great, who at the age of 33 wept for he had no more worlds to conquer. I'm a little bit older and I now have a podcast.
It does put it in perspective, right? That's true. Perhaps we could talk about, now, because you were saying that in Turkey, with your coffee would come Turkish delight, or perhaps apricots or something. So, food that British people would have with tea. Again, the main thing to remember is that British people drink tea like Americans drink coffee, any time of the day, with or without food. But if you are going to have food with tea, as in not part of any sort of meal or not just a drink by itself, the most common thing would be biscuits, right? The various kinds of biscuits. Of course, Americans call them cookies. We do use the term cookie in British English, but it refers specifically to a chocolate chip biscuit,
Yeah, something
right?
sweeter, right? So biscuit is fairly... It's not so sweet, right?
Well, I'm not sure, because you would certainly call, say, a hobnob a biscuit. And a hobnob's sweet, a ginger biscuit.
A bourbon,
right?
I guess, as well.
Bourbon's bourbon's very sweet. I think it's more. Well, I think we call the whole things biscuits. We use the term cookie, but as far as I can make out, we only use it for things that have chips of something in it. So a chocolate chip cookie, right, would be the most common one.
I'm thinking in Yorkshire we've got the Fat Rascals, so they've got bits in it, but there's not chocolate, so it wouldn't be called a...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I know Americans use the term biscuit, and although I've been to America, I've got American friends, I can't remember exactly how it's used, but it is for more savoury things. Also, I'm pretty sure they have... I'm sure your American listeners are going to be shouting at what I'm trying to think about. They have some sort of dish that they call a biscuit, but I think they eat it with like a meal, like with meat or something.
One of my great joys is that in an office with loads of Brits and Americans, we've also got Americans from different parts of America.
Ah, yeah, of course, who call it different things, right? Yeah, which is the same in the UK, right? There's
so
the big...
me, America's the West Coast.
Right.
That's all I know.
Yeah.
But I work with Americans from the East Coast, so sometimes my absolute certain knowledge about the US is dead wrong to them.
Well, you have this similar debate in the UK with what to call a bread roll, or a bread bun, or a bread bun. And it was really funny because recently one of my Chinese colleagues asked me, what is a bread roll? And in my head I just was remembering arguments I've had with people from Manchester and Newcastle, and I was like, I don't want to go down this road.
Scone,
God.
You drive 6 hours in Canada and you start to reach the end of your province. You drive 2 minutes in the UK. The accents have changed twice. Bread's called something different.
Yeah, for such a relatively small island, we do have a diversity of accents and dialects. But so with snacks to go with tea, biscuits would absolutely be 99% of the time if somebody offers you something to eat with tea, it is some sort of biscuit. And something which I didn't realise wasn't well known outside of the UK is that we always, or not always, but very often dip our biscuits in tea. And a lot of people I've noticed didn't know that and had never done it before, and that's really surprising to me because it seems so natural to me. If I had a biscuit and some tea, I wouldn't not dip them together, right?
There was some serious scientific research.
The best ways to dip. Yeah, there was. I remember that about the best biscuits like to dip into tea, how long you should hold it. But I was surprised to hear that many people hadn't done that. If you're listening to this and you drink tea and you like biscuits, please try dipping those biscuits in your tea. It's a whole world of taste that you have yet to discover. So, that would be the most common thing. Certainly, when I used to go to my grand's house, the first thing she'd do is make a cup of tea, bring out a plate or a box of biscuits, and we'd just sit there dipping our biscuits into our tea. What's your favourite biscuit for tea dipping?
Bourbon.
Yeah, bourbon biscuits.
I can go with ginger snap.
Okay. Bourbon biscuits, for those who don't know, are kind of like a chocolate sandwich.
Yes.
Would be the best way to describe it. It's kind of quite hard. Mm-hmm. The two sort of sandwich bread, what you might... Yeah. How would I describe it? The bottom and top layer are quite hard, and they're made of chocolate. Well, they're chocolate flavoured, and then it has the inside is a kind of creamy chocolatey thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, bourbons dip really well. I really like hobnobs.
Okay.
Yeah, hobnobs are a kind of oat biscuit, and I find again because they hold up really well. You want something you can sit in your tea for a while and let it soak up all of the milky tea goodness, right? Yeah, digestive biscuits as well dip pretty well.
They do. They do, and there's rich tea, I think, when I liked as a kid.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of rich tea, no. Rich tea biscuits, which you'd think would be great for dipping in tea, actually they don't stand up very well, do they? If you sink them in tea for a bit too long, they'll just drop out.
I've got to tell you, there's a piece of news that I thought was amazing, so I gave to my Chinese students. They didn't find this funny at all. I've got to tell you.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Cars Water Biscuits. The factory was closed a few years ago because it was flooded.
Okay, yeah, the irony.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
These are biscuits made with water, tonic water, instead of milk.
Right, okay.
So they're quite flaky.
Okay, I'm not sure I've had them, to be honest.
No, they're often with cheese, so they're kind of cheese crackers.
Right, is that maybe what Americans think biscuits are? Crackers? I don't know. Sorry, American listeners, please message Tom and let him know. We're not trying to be disrespectful of your eating culture.
Totally
but
am. Just for the record, I am disrespectful, and I regularly am.
But we're not 100% sure. What is it that you mean when you refer to biscuits? When we refer to biscuits, we're talking about what you guys would most often refer to as cookies.
Whilst we're in controversial areas, I'll have to ask you: are Jaffa Cakes?
Oh, that's a big one. So, for your listeners who don't know, Jaffa Cakes are a kind... Well, see, I'm going to say a kind of biscuit, so I've already answered you. Jaffa Cakes are a kind of biscuit, but they have a sponge bottom, which is cake-like, and then they have a sort of crisp chocolate top, but they're the shape and size of biscuits. I think they're biscuits, and again, I think the reason is perhaps because you can dip them in tea.
Oh.
You can't dip a cake in tea, right? You couldn't get a slice of cake and dip it into tea. It would be impossible. Whereas you can always dip a biscuit in tea. I mean, even biscuits like rich tea, which aren't so good for doing it, you can do it. So I'm going to say Jaffa Cakes are biscuits. That, again, your listeners might not be familiar with that. That is a big debate in the UK about, because they're called Jaffa Cakes, but for all intents and purposes, they are biscuits. So there's a debate about whether or not they're cakes.
There was a court case over this because it gets into taxation.
I heard about that, yeah, because the biscuits and cakes are taxed differently.
So I'll be open. I go with what the judge said.
Right, okay.
So a cake goes hard when it goes off, and a biscuit goes soft when it goes
Really?
off.
Is that how they defined it?
That's what the judge said.
Okay.
I realised there were many arguments.
Yeah.
But
That's
what I
interesting.
take away from this whole situation.
Okay. What about an ice cream cake? That melts when it goes bad. So, well, who knows?
It's ice cream, clearly.
Yeah, we could spend...
it's a dessert.
Yeah, we could spend all day on that. So, back when you were in Turkish Cyprus, were there many other British families there?
So when I first went, there were a collection of, I think, 200 Brits. Most of them were former colonial officers. So when you went out to, say, India or East Africa, Cyprus was the last place with fresh fruit before you carried on to, say, the Red Sea.
Right.
So a lot of them had it as a heavenly image. And of course, I mean, one gentleman, he was approaching 100, and there were a lot of them who were over 100. One lady I met had been out to Africa, her husband was a missionary, and had gone out into broadly uncharted territory with 100 black bearers. One gentleman was a constitutional lawyer. I've talked to you about him before, but he helped write 3 African constitutions.
Okay.
So this was the time that he went out.
Interesting people, I'm sure.
So my parents were the young people. As a teenager, I was the teenager.
Right, okay.
So that's largely why I got kind of identified as the Englishman.
Right, I see.
That was my kind of handle.
That's interesting. So those people then, who many would say were very stereotypically kind of old British, if you know what I mean. Were they tea drinkers or were they coffee drinkers? Because they were living in this, great place for coffee, but they came from a tea culture. What were they mostly?
So mostly tea drinkers, but many of them had been to Kenya, and Kenya was very much the place to go. It was always thought to be one of the happiest colonies you could go to, one of the places where the Brits and the locals got on the best.
Yeah.
And the coffee culture is a big part of that. So the Kenyan mountain coffee was very popular. Some of those have been in Africa.
Kenya is also a tea growing region, though, isn't it?
It is.
Because the British took tea there as they did to India, of course. Yeah.
But both existed, but I'd say tea was the dominant. But largely, as you described, milk. Some people would have it without milk, actually with lemon. So perhaps these are the groups. But again, we have the fresh citrus fruit, right? So
that's actually really interesting. Just made me think about how tea is drank differently. If you go to Hong Kong, as you obviously do very often, the way that of course in Hong Kong, there's all sorts of ways of drinking tea because Hong Kongers are not only from Hong Kong, but they've come from various places in mainland China. But the Hong Kong way of drinking tea is basically based on the British way of drinking tea, which is black tea with milk. But of course, there aren't many farms in Hong Kong generally, and there isn't a great availability of fresh milk. So they actually use condensed milk, right? And they do the same if you go to Malaysia as well. The Malaysian way of drinking tea is black tea topped up with a dash of condensed milk. So I'd never had that until I went to Malaysia, which was quite a few years ago now. But it's very common across these sort of former colonies in this part of the world where there wasn't a tradition so much of farming cows, and cows that were farmed for meat or to work on the fields, right? They weren't farmed for milk production. And as a result, they imported this condensed milk, and that's what they used for making their tea. And it makes... I'm not a big fan myself. It's a bit too sweet for me. But
my father was born in Malaysia. Say the colonial background. So he was brought up there, and then as a young kid lived in Egypt, Yemen, and Cyprus was the first place really where they had cows.
Right, okay.
But they didn't have them where the family was living, so they travelled once for the whole day. At that time, the infrastructure was less all over the world than it is today. So they made this great long trip to see cows on a farm and to have fresh milk, which of course, from my grandmother, she's from Wales, of course this is what she grew up on.
Yeah.
So it was a great, exciting thing to give the kids milk. And of course they're kids, and they were not too happy at having this thing they'd never had before.
Yeah, of course,
and it was warm, and it was
and just fresh milk by itself, I suppose, especially if you were used to something like condensed milk, which would be much sweeter, is very good for kids, right? But yeah, if you do find yourself in that part of the world, Hong Kong, Malaysia, definitely try some of the local tea as it's made with the condensed milk. It's an interesting drink. It's a lot more filling, as you can imagine, than a normal cup of tea. I wouldn't want to have too many glasses of it, but it's worth trying.
Regional teas, I mean, we're in Fujian, which is quite close to Taipei, and in Taipei the bubble tea is the most famous.
Yeah, this is and it's become hugely popular now in the mainland as well, which is and also very much so, I've heard, in America, somewhat in the UK, but I think in America it's really caught on, and they call it milk tea. I think we would describe it as a tea latte, because it's like a small amount of strong tea topped up with entirely with milk, and then of course with those tapioca balls. And yeah, it's become very popular with young Chinese people. Again, I'm not a big fan myself, and you might not argue, you could say it wasn't really traditional, but it's very popular here. I mean, if you right where we're sitting in the moment, if you walk downstairs, you'll see many milk tea shops.
I've had it made for me in Taipei, but due to the milk allergy, they made it without the milk.
Okay, that's
so
interesting.
I just had those funny little balls.
The tapioca balls. Yeah. I mean, they've expanded, right? Many of these milk tea shops will now offer a variety of different, I'm not even sure what you'd call them. They become sort of just like soft drinks, really. Soft drinks with bits of tea in it. Is the best way of describing it,
Yeah. And is the soy milk drink popular here? So in Shenzhen, there's a hot soy milk drink that you dip bread in, and that can be popular.
Okay, yeah, you can get that here, it's, again, for breakfast, like you were saying, it's popular, but soy milk is not used as a substitute for milk in the way that it really is in say, the UK for people who have milk allergies. But yeah, people do drink bean milk, but usually, as you've described it, it's served hot as part of a breakfast combination, which, you could dip your bread, your yao tiao into, or something like that.
Because in the UK I've had it cold, so getting it hot, piping hot, like a cup of tea, was
It's quite interesting, right?
So, Caine, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
So the best place probably is to go to my YouTube channel, which, if you just go to YouTube and type in Videos by Caine, and Caine is Caine. So Videos by Caine, I will be the first result, and if you do that, I suggest you watch my mini-series that I made about Fujianese tea. I made it with a local film studio, and basically I went and prepared a kind of Fujianese-style afternoon tea, which involved me, finding some tea and visiting a tea processing plant, and also learning how to make a traditional snack, and then getting a lacquerware tray to drink my tea from. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the tea culture of this province and this city in particular, you can do that by watching that series, which you'll find on my YouTube channel. Just go to Videos by Caine. On YouTube, you'll get it.
I'll put a link into the show notes.
Great,
I appreciate it. Describing the tea farm, I was wondering what does it look like, so we can just go and see.
Yeah, well, in the video, I visit a jasmine farm, not a tea farm, but I visit a tea processing plant. So
yes,
yeah,
so, cool. I'll have a look. Is there anything else?
That's it from me. Thank you very much for inviting me back on, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you very much. A pleasure as always.
All right, thank you.